Chapter 1. Cracks in a Peaceful Home. The day my son's wife pushed my wife to the floor and called her filthy, I realized kindness had turned into a weapon against us. For 8 years, we opened our home, our hearts, and every door to help them stand on their feet. But behind every thank you, she was quietly replacing our names on the bills, on the taxes, even on the mailbox, until the house that carried 40 years of our memories no longer felt like ours. My wife cried in silence. My son defended the woman who was tearing our family apart, and I kept asking myself how love could blind a man so completely. Then one night, I heard her on the phone whisper, "This house will be mine soon." That was the moment everything changed. My name is Michael Grant, and this is how I learned that justice sometimes begins the moment you stop staying silent. But the story didn't start with revenge. It started the day Daniel and Vanessa came back home. I remember standing on the porch, the afternoon sun resting on the roof tiles, watching my son carry boxes from the trunk of his car. He looked tired. The kind of tired that doesn't come from a single bad day, but from years of disappointment. Elaine stood beside me, holding a dish towel in her hands, wringing it the way she always did when she was anxious. She didn't say much, just whispered, "I hope this won't last too long." Daniel smiled when he saw me. "Dad, this is just temporary," he said. "Things have been rough since the layoffs. We just need a little time to get back on track." I nodded, clapping him on the shoulder. "That's what family is for." Then Vanessa stepped out of the car, sunglasses on, her hair perfectly styled despite the wind. She gave me a polite smile, but her eyes were cold. "Thanks again for letting us stay, Michael," she said, her voice too bright to be sincere. From the first day, the house felt different. Elaine had spent the whole morning preparing their old room, changing sheets, making sure there were fresh flowers by the window. When she brought in a vase of roses that afternoon, Vanessa frowned. "Maybe it's better to keep the room neutral," she said. "Too many scents can bother the baby." Elaine froze, unsure how to respond, then quietly took the vase away. That evening, we had dinner together for the first time in years. Elaine cooked pot roast, Daniel's favorite since he was a boy. Vanessa barely touched her food. She kept checking her phone, saying something about clients needing her online. Elaine asked what kind of work she was doing these days. "Social media consulting," Vanessa replied, without looking up. Daniel added that she had some great opportunities coming. Elaine smiled politely, but I could see her confusion. After dinner, Elaine washed dishes, while Daniel helped Vanessa set up a portable crib in the guest room. I heard Vanessa's voice through the wall. "Let's move the crib closer to the window," she said. "There's better airflow." Daniel hesitated. "Mom might not like that. She likes to keep the curtains closed at night." Vanessa laughed softly. "It's our space now, isn't it?" Later that night, Elaine sat at the kitchen table long after the dishes were done. She didn't speak until I sat beside her. "She's particular," she said carefully, "but I suppose she wants things her way for the baby." I tried to reassure her. "It's an adjustment, that's all." But Elaine didn't look convinced. A week later, I came home from the hardware store to find Vanessa rearranging the living room. The couch had been pushed back, the old rug rolled up against the wall. Elaine stood nearby, hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I thought it might open the space more," Vanessa said casually. "It feels brighter this way." Elaine whispered that the rug was a gift from her sister. Vanessa smiled. "Oh, I didn't know. We can store it somewhere safe then." She said it like she was doing us a favor. That night, I could tell Elaine was holding something back. In bed, she turned her face toward the window and said softly, "I feel like a guest in my own house." I tried to tell her that Daniel just needed time, that Vanessa would settle down, but even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. The next morning, Elaine was in the kitchen arranging flowers again, yellow lilies this time. The smell filled the room, bright and sweet. Vanessa walked in holding the baby and wrinkled her nose. "The smell isn't good for Emily," she said flatly. Elaine froze, her hand still on the vase. I saw her lips tremble before she said, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bother anyone. She carried the vase outside and dumped the flowers into the trash. When Daniel came downstairs, Vanessa said lightly, I told your mom about the lilies. You know how sensitive Emily is. Daniel nodded without looking at his mother. It's fine. Mom, we'll just avoid strong scents around the baby. Elaine didn't reply. She sat quietly, cutting fruit into small pieces, her eyes downcast. That evening at dinner, the tension lingered. Elaine served roasted chicken, but Vanessa barely ate. Daniel tried to start a conversation about job applications, but it fell flat. When he finally mentioned that Vanessa had been looking into freelance opportunities, I said, That's good, maybe this stay won't be long. Vanessa looked up sharply, then smiled. Of course not, Michael. We're not planning to overstay. After they went upstairs, I found Elaine standing by the sink again, staring at the empty vase she had washed clean. I walked over and put my hand on her shoulder. It'll settle down, I said, trying to sound confident. She just nodded. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I went to my study and opened the drawer where I kept an old tape recorder. It had been years since I used it. Back when I used to document construction projects for my firm, I pressed record and sat in silence for a moment, the red light blinking in the dark. My voice came out low and uncertain. This house used to be the warmest place I knew. The place where laughter echoed in every corner, where birthdays smelled like vanilla cake and Sunday mornings smelled like coffee. But now it feels like someone's closing the windows, one by one. I paused, the only sound in the room, the hum of the refrigerator down the hall. Maybe it's just me, I whispered into the recorder. Maybe I'm too old to adapt. But when I saw Elaine throw away those flowers, I realized something had changed. Respect doesn't disappear all at once. It fades, quietly, like sunlight slipping off the walls at dusk. I stopped the recording and sat there, listening to the silence. Upstairs, the baby began to cry, followed by Vanessa's sharp voice, then Daniel's softer one. Elaine didn't move. For a long moment, I stared at the dark hallway leading to their room, feeling like a stranger in the house I built with my own hands. When I finally turned off the light, the tape recorder still lay open on the desk, the red light blinking faintly, waiting for the next thing I would have to say. Chapter 2. The thin line between help and control. The next few weeks passed in a strange rhythm that didn't feel like our life anymore. Vanessa's presence filled every corner of the house. She was polite enough when Daniel was around, but when it was just Elaine and me, she carried herself like she owned the place. She had opinions about everything, from the way Elaine folded towels to how often we should vacuum. Elaine tried to stay pleasant, offering small smiles and quiet cooperation, but I could tell she was swallowing her words. Meals changed first. Elaine had always cooked early, around 5, because she liked to eat before the evening news. Vanessa shifted that to 7, saying Emily's sleep schedule came first. Soon dinner became her show. She'd research healthy baby environments online and announce new rules every week. No salt, less butter, less noise during the baby's nap. Elaine would nod and adjust. I watched her hands tremble one night as she passed a plate of chicken that she had carefully seasoned, only for Vanessa to scrape off the skin and mutter something about saturated fat. Cleaning routines followed. Vanessa liked the house spotless, not because it was dirty, but because it gave her something to control. She bought color-coded storage bins and labeled them family supplies, baby care, and miscellaneous. Elaine's knitting basket ended up in miscellaneous. I walked in one afternoon to see my wife quietly rearranging her own kitchen cabinets after Vanessa had reorganized for efficiency. She didn't complain, just sighed and moved her flour and sugar back to their usual spots. Nancy Keller, our neighbor from across the street, came by for coffee one afternoon. She leaned in close when Vanessa left the room. Michael, she said, I don't know how you stand it. I laughed it off, but she shook her head. I saw her yelling at Elaine the other day about the laundry. My wife's cheeks flushed with embarrassment when Nancy mentioned it. Elaine smiled weakly and said, It's fine. She's just particular. Nancy didn't look convinced. The real shift happened one quiet morning. Elaine was sitting on the couch, holding Emily and humming softly. It was one of those small, peaceful moments that make a house feel like a home again. Then Vanessa appeared in the doorway. Her face tightened, and before anyone could react, she crossed the room, snatched the baby from Elaine's arms, and said sharply, Don't touch my child unless you've washed your hands. The words cut through the room like glass breaking. Elaine froze. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. I stood there, my paper slipping from my hands. Vanessa adjusted the baby's blanket as if nothing had happened. Daniel came down the stairs just in time to hear the tail end of it. What's going on? He asked, looking from his wife to his mother. Vanessa didn't hesitate. Your mom needs to be more careful with germs. I just told her to wash her hands. Daniel frowned but didn't argue. He looked at me instead. Don't make a big deal out of it, Dad. You know how new mothers can be. Elaine stood up slowly and went into the kitchen without a word. I wanted to follow her, but Daniel was already changing the subject, talking about a job interview that might happen next week. My answers came out hollow. All I could think about was the way Elaine had looked at the baby, so full of love, and how quickly that look had turned into shame. After that day, something in her changed. Elaine avoided Vanessa as much as possible. She spent more time outside, tending to her small garden, even in the cold. Inside, she moved carefully, like a guest, trying not to make noise. When Vanessa was in the kitchen, Elaine waited in the hallway until she left before pouring herself coffee. The house didn't sound like our house anymore. It was too quiet. One evening, Daniel mentioned that Vanessa had taken over paying the bills. She said she'd noticed late fees on a few utilities and wanted to help manage them. I frowned. Late fees? We had never missed a payment in our lives. Daniel shrugged. Vanessa's just organized, he said. She's trying to take some pressure off you and Mom. I didn't argue, but something about that conversation stayed with me. A few days later, I went to get the mail. I noticed one of the envelopes looked different. The electric company's name was the same, but the account holder read, Vanessa Hartwell. I stared at it for a long moment, reading the name again and again, as if it would change. I walked inside and handed the envelope to Elaine. She looked at it, her eyes widening. That can't be right, she said quietly. Maybe it's just a mistake. That afternoon, Nancy stopped by again. Over coffee, she mentioned casually. Looks like they sent your bill under her name this month. I blinked. How do you know? Nancy laughed softly. I saw her picking up the mail earlier, she said. I thought maybe you let her handle it. I didn't answer. I just nodded, my stomach tightening. That night, Elaine asked if she should bring it up to Vanessa. No, I said. Let me look into it first. She nodded, trusting me, but I could see she was tired, and part of her didn't want to fight anymore. She had lost something she couldn't name, something beyond control of chores or bills. When everyone went to bed, I stayed at the kitchen table with that electric bill in my hand. I studied it like a blueprint, tracing every line, every printed word, as if the truth might be hidden in the paper itself. My name was still there, small and faded, listed as previous account holder. I felt heat rise in my chest. This wasn't a mix-up. This was deliberate. I folded the bill carefully and tucked it into a drawer in my study. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet, but I knew I couldn't throw it away. It was more than just paper. It was proof that something in our house had shifted from kindness to ownership. Before turning off the light, I looked toward the stairs. I could hear Vanessa's voice upstairs, calm and commanding, giving Daniel instructions about baby formula. Elaine's softer voice was nowhere to be heard. For the first time since Daniel had moved back home, I realized how quickly power can change hands when good people stay quiet. The house creaked as the wind pushed against the siding. I sat there in the dim light, the folded bill resting under my hand, and felt that strange burn of unease settle deep inside me. I didn't know it yet, but that small piece of paper was the beginning of everything that was about to unravel. Chapter 3: Signs That Can't Be Ignored. By early spring, the air in Aspen Ridge felt thinner somehow. The snow was melting, but the house felt colder than it had in years. Daniel spent most mornings at his laptop, looking for jobs that never called back. Vanessa sat across from him on her tablet, claiming she was working with clients online. I never saw her talk to anyone. She would just scroll, take notes, then disappear into the office with stacks of folders and envelopes that used to be ours. Elaine tried to ignore it. She focused on small things she could still control. She watered her plants, folded laundry, and cooked quiet dinners. I could see how tired she was. She smiled less, spoke softly, and always looked like she was listening for footsteps in the hallway before moving around the house. One morning, I walked into the office and found Vanessa sitting at my desk. She looked up quickly and said she was reorganizing the household files to help Daniel with budgeting. My checkbooks, insurance papers, even our mortgage documents were spread across the desk. I forced a calm tone. "Those are private," I said. She smiled. "I'm just making it easier to manage, Michael. You'd be surprised how many seniors lose track of their accounts." The way she said it made my stomach tighten. That evening, Daniel mentioned that Rachel, Vanessa's friend who worked in real estate, had been giving her some advice. He said Vanessa wanted to make sure everything was protected for the future. He said it like it was a thoughtful gesture, not a red flag. When I asked what kind of advice, he shrugged. Something about having both names on household records, just in case anything ever happened to you and Mom. Elaine looked at me across the table, her fork resting mid-air. We didn't say a word. The next afternoon, I went through the mail. There was a thick envelope from the bank, one of those official ones with the blue logo printed in the corner. Inside was a form labeled Home Authorization, Secondary Owner, Vanessa Hartwell. My name was there too, listed as primary. My chest went cold. I read the fine print twice. It authorized an additional user to make decisions on our mortgage and property account. I had never signed it. I waited until that evening, when Daniel and Vanessa were in the living room watching TV. I held the paper out to her. "Can you explain this?" I asked. She blinked, smiled, and said she must have sent it in by accident. "I was just helping with the payments," she said sweetly. "It must have been processed wrong." She reached out her hand as if to take the form back, but I didn't let go. Elaine was standing near the hallway, watching. Her face had gone pale. Vanessa laughed lightly and said, "I'm just trying to help, Michael. You don't have to be so suspicious." Daniel shifted uncomfortably on the couch. "Maybe it's just a mix-up, Dad. Vanessa's been trying to straighten out some billing issues." I looked at my son and felt something crack inside me. That night, Elaine barely ate. She sat with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. I tried to reassure her, saying we'd go to the bank tomorrow and clear it up. She nodded, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. When she finally went to bed, she looked smaller than I remembered. The next morning started like any other. I heard the kettle whistle and the soft clatter of plates in the kitchen. Then there was a sound that made my blood run cold, a sharp thud, followed by silence. I ran in and found Elaine on the floor. Her hand still held the counter edge, the other pressed against her chest. Her face was ashen. Vanessa stood frozen for a second, then called out for Daniel. He came rushing down the stairs, his voice panicked. "Mom, what happened?" Elaine tried to speak but couldn't. We got her into the car and drove straight to Aspen Ridge Medical Center. The doctor said her blood pressure had dropped, probably stress and fatigue. He told her to rest. We drove home in silence. Vanessa carried Emily upstairs, and Daniel stayed behind to call his sister-in-law for advice. When I helped Elaine into bed, she whispered, "I can't keep living like this." I held her hand and said, "You don't have to," but I wasn't sure how I would fix it yet. Later that evening, when everyone else had gone to sleep, I went to my office. The house was quiet except for the creak of the heater turning on. I opened my laptop to check our bank accounts. Everything looked fine until I noticed a new folder in the email account we shared for household bills. It was labeled Property Access. Inside were multiple messages between Vanessa and the bank's online service. Each email confirmed updates to the account permissions, adding her name as a secondary owner. Some were approved, others were pending. My throat went dry as I clicked through them. There were attachments, scanned forms with signatures that looked like mine but weren't. My name had been copied, printed, maybe traced. I stared at one of them until my eyes blurred. It wasn't just her name showing up on a bill anymore. She was changing the structure of ownership. I printed every email quietly, feeding the pages into the printer one at a time so the sound wouldn't wake anyone. Each sheet came out warm, the ink fresh and dark. I placed them in a folder, the same one where I had hidden that electric bill weeks ago. When I was done, I turned off the screen and sat there in the dim light, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs. I wanted to wake Daniel right then, show him everything, force him to see what was happening. But when I imagined his face, his tired eyes, the way he always defended Vanessa, I stopped. He wouldn't believe me. Not yet. Elaine's breathing from the next room was uneven, shallow. I went to check on her. She was asleep, her hair damp with sweat. I stood there for a long moment, looking at the woman who had spent her whole life building this home with me, only to watch someone else quietly take it apart. I returned to the office and looked at the stack of printed papers. They didn't look like much, just numbers and names, but I could feel their weight. I slid them into the drawer, locked it, and whispered to myself, "This ends soon." Outside, wind scraped against the windows, carrying the sound of distant traffic from the highway. I thought about all the times I had walked through this house late at night, feeling safe. Now every creak in the floorboards sounded like an intrusion. I didn't know how far Vanessa would go, but I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. When I finally turned off the light, I left the folder on the desk beside the old tape recorder. The red light blinked once before fading to black, as if waiting for me to finish what I had started. Chapter 4: Strangers Under Our Roof. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. The house was still, but something inside me was restless. I went downstairs, made a pot of coffee, and opened the drawer where I kept the folder. I spread the papers across the kitchen table, each one another small betrayal. Electric bills, water bills, gas, even the property tax notice. Every account had been quietly switched to Vanessa's name. I checked the dates. It had been happening for months, slowly, one by one, right under my nose. When the mail arrived later that day, I stood by the window and watched the carrier walk up the drive. He flipped through the envelopes, hesitated, and then slid them into the box. I went out to get them and saw it myself. Half the letters were addressed to Vanessa Hartwell, not just the utilities but ads, notices, even official documents. My own name was second on some, missing entirely on others. That evening, Nancy came by to drop off a casserole. She looked uncomfortable, shifting the dish between her hands. "Michael, I didn't want to say anything before, but I think the post office has your house listed under the wrong resident." I looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" She glanced toward the living room where Vanessa's voice floated from the television. "The mailman told me last week that he had to update your address label because someone filed a change of primary recipient." I stared at her, my stomach sinking. Thank you, Nancy, I said quietly. You didn't hear it from me, she replied. That night I couldn't sleep. Elaine was dozing beside me, her breathing soft and shallow. I heard movement downstairs, a low hum of conversation. I followed the sound quietly to the hallway. Vanessa was in the kitchen, her phone pressed to her ear. I recognized Rachel's voice faintly through the speaker. Vanessa's tone was sharp but excited. If my name stays long enough, the law will be on my side. She laughed softly, a sound that made my blood run cold. Elaine stood in the shadows behind me, her hand gripping the door frame. Her eyes were wide, full of disbelief. Back in our room, Elaine sat on the edge of the bed, her hands shaking. Michael, please, don't start a fight, she said. Let me bear it a little longer. It's not worth losing Daniel over this. I looked at her, at the woman who had held this family together for 40 years, and I wanted to promise that everything would be fine. But the truth was, I didn't know if it would. Over the next few days, I began documenting everything. I took photos of mail, copied envelopes, and stored each piece in a separate folder. I wrote down dates and times of every odd thing Vanessa said or did. I didn't tell Daniel. He seemed more withdrawn, spending hours in his room, lost in whatever was left of his pride after months of unemployment. One afternoon, I came home early from the hardware store. The house was quiet except for the soft buzz of the dryer. I found Elaine in the laundry room, folding sheets. She looked pale, tired, her movements slow. I told her to sit down, but she shook her head. I need to finish this, she said softly. I reached for her arm just as her body went limp. The sheet slipped from her hands, and she crumpled to the floor. I called her name, my voice breaking. Vanessa appeared at the doorway, eyes wide but expression unreadable. Daniel came running seconds later. Help me, I shouted. We got Elaine into the car and drove her straight to the emergency room at Aspen Ridge Medical Center. The doctor said it was exhaustion, dehydration, too much stress. He said she needed rest and quiet. I nodded, but inside I felt something harden. This house was killing her slowly. On the drive home, Elaine rested her head against the window. Vanessa sat in the back seat, silent, her arms folded. Daniel kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror but said nothing. The tension was thick enough to choke on. When we pulled into the driveway, Vanessa took the baby and went straight inside without offering to help Elaine. That night I sat alone in the living room, the lamp casting long shadows across the floor. I thought about how we had opened our home to our son out of love, and how that love had been turned into leverage. Every kindness had become a tool for control. I needed to do something before it went any further. I went to my study and stared at the folder of documents again. It wasn't enough to be angry. I needed someone who understood what this all meant. Someone who knew the law. That was when I remembered Robert Fields. Robert and I had worked together years ago on a community construction project in Boulder. He had left engineering to become a family attorney. We had kept in touch occasionally, exchanging Christmas cards and the occasional phone call. He was the kind of man who didn't waste words, but when he spoke, you listened. I hesitated before dialing his number. It was late, almost 10, but when I heard his calm voice on the line, something in me steadied. Robert, I said quietly, I think I need your help. There was a pause. Michael, it's been a long time. What's going on? I told him everything. The utilities, the mail, the forms, the overheard call. My voice shook more than I wanted it to. He didn't interrupt, just listened. When I finished, there was silence for a few seconds before he spoke. Michael, you need to stop confronting her directly. Keep documenting everything, but don't let her know you're aware. This sounds like she's trying to establish legal residency, maybe even partial ownership. I stared at the folder on my desk. What does that mean for us? It means she's building a case, he said. If you let her stay long enough without boundaries, she could claim rights to the property. I felt a chill run through me. What should I do? Tomorrow, come to my office in Boulder. Bring every document you have. We'll start from there. When I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. Elaine stirred in the bedroom, murmuring in her sleep. I walked to the doorway and watched her breathe, fragile and exhausted. She had carried this family through decades of struggle, and now I was watching her being erased, one signature at a time. Outside, the porch light flickered in the wind. Somewhere upstairs, Vanessa's phone buzzed with another message, another plan I couldn't yet see. I looked down at the folder in my hands and felt the weight of every decision I had avoided. The next morning would begin something new, something I should have done months ago. But that night, sitting in the dim light of my study, I finally understood what Robert meant when he said boundaries. Love had made me generous. Fear had made me silent. Now both had to end. Chapter 5. The Paper Trail of Deceit. The next morning I drove to Boulder before sunrise. The roads were slick from last night's rain, the mountains still hidden behind fog. Robert's office was in an old brick building near Pearl Street, small but precise, like the man himself. When I walked in, he was already waiting, a stack of papers on his desk and coffee steaming beside him. He listened quietly as I laid everything out. The bills, the forms, the emails, the envelope addressed to Vanessa. When I finished, he leaned back and folded his hands. "Michael, she's setting up a pattern of residency," he said. "Utilities, mail, even her name on tax documents. That's exactly how people build a paper trail." A paper trail. The phrase hit me hard. I had spent a lifetime building things you could touch, solid things, concrete and steel. But this was invisible. A trap made of signatures and system updates. Robert pulled out a yellow legal pad. "You need to document every single thing from now on," he said. "Don't confront her. Don't tip her off. Just collect proof. Emails, mail, witness statements. I'll handle the legal side." I nodded. "What about Daniel?" He sighed. "Leave him out of it for now. He's too close. She's using his dependence as leverage. Let me know the moment you find anything new." I left his office with a folder full of instructions and a stomach full of dread. Back home, Vanessa was in the kitchen feeding Emily while talking on her phone. Her voice carried, too bright, too rehearsed. "Yes, Pastor Henry said it's fine to use the fellowship hall," she said. "It will be a great way to meet people." Daniel was sitting at the table, scrolling through job listings. I kissed Elaine on the forehead and asked what was going on. Vanessa smiled. "Oh, just a small gathering at the church. A little community get-together. I think it's good for us to connect." That evening she handed out flyers printed from our own printer. Community Family Support Night, hosted by Vanessa Hartwell. I felt a bitter taste in my mouth. Saturday came. Elaine didn't want to go, but I insisted we should. People would talk if we didn't show up. The church parking lot was full, the smell of coffee and baked goods drifting through the doors. Inside, Vanessa stood near the stage, greeting everyone with her perfect smile. Daniel hovered close, looking proud. Elaine stayed near the back, her shoulders stiff. At first it was harmless. Vanessa thanked everyone for welcoming her family to Aspen Ridge, talked about adjusting to life with a new baby. But then, her tone shifted. "Sometimes it's hard living with older relatives who don't understand modern parenting," she said lightly, her voice carrying across the room. "My mother-in-law means well, but she's a bit traditional." A few people chuckled. She smiled wider. "She gets anxious if things aren't done her way. It can be stressful trying to keep everyone happy." I looked at Elaine, her face drained of color. Pastor Henry stood frozen near the doorway, his eyes flicking between us and Vanessa. He looked uncomfortable but didn't interrupt. The laughter rippled again, soft but sharp. I felt my hands clench at my sides. Elaine whispered, "Let's go, Michael." I nodded, and we slipped out quietly. The drive home was silent except for the sound of gravel under the tires. When we pulled into the driveway, she didn't get out of the car right away. "They've turned me into a joke," she said finally, her voice trembling. I reached across and took her hand. "No one humiliates you in your own house," I said. "Not anymore." Inside, Daniel was feeding the baby, oblivious. Vanessa looked up from her phone and smiled. "Everything went great," she said. "People really connected." Elaine brushed past her and went straight to the bedroom. I stood there for a moment, feeling something heavy settle in my chest. Then I went to the office and opened my drawer. The old tape recorder was still there, the same one I had used months ago when things first started unraveling. I picked it up, turned it over in my hand, and pressed the red button. My own voice filled the silence. "This is day 1, I said quietly. "I'm recording everything from now on." That night, I left the recorder running on my desk while I pretended to read in the living room. I heard Vanessa on the phone again, her tone low and deliberate. "No, Rachel, they don't suspect anything. He's too soft." She laughed. "They'll never see it coming." The next morning, Elaine tried to go about her routine, but her movements were slow, heavy. She barely ate breakfast. When Daniel left to run errands, she said softly, "I can't go back to that church, Michael." I nodded. "You don't have to." The house felt different that day, quieter but full of tension. I could feel Vanessa watching me, waiting for me to challenge her. I didn't. I just started listening. Every phone call, every conversation, every shift in her tone became another line in my growing archive of truth. Later, Pastor Henry called. "Michael, I'm sorry about yesterday. I didn't expect her to say those things. Elaine's a good woman, everyone knows that." His words were kind but useless. The damage was already done. That night, after Elaine went to bed, I sat at my desk and replayed the recording from earlier. Her laughter echoed through the speaker, confident, careless. It wasn't just arrogance. It was strategy. She thought she had already won. I looked around the office, at the stacks of folders and notes, the quiet hum of the lamp overhead. For years I had believed that kindness could fix anything, that patience would make people see reason. But as her voice filled the room again, I realized patience had turned into permission. I turned off the recorder and slid it into the drawer beside the folder of bills. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt since before all of this began. Resolve, the kind that doesn't fade with time or fear. Upstairs, I could hear the baby crying softly and Vanessa's footsteps pacing the hall. Elaine's voice was barely audible, soothing, steady, despite everything. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, "This ends here." Outside, the night was still. The wind brushed against the windows, and for a moment the house sounded alive again, as if it were listening, waiting, the way I had been all this time. Chapter 6. When the truth breaks through. The next morning I called Nancy and asked her to come over. My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. She arrived carrying her phone and a look that told me she already knew why I had called. "Michael, I wasn't sure if I should show you this," she said quietly, "but after what I saw, I couldn't keep it to myself." She unlocked her phone and handed it to me. The video was short, less than 30 seconds, but it was enough. Vanessa stood in the living room, her face twisted in anger, arguing with Elaine. My wife was holding a vase, trying to explain something, and then, without warning, Vanessa pushed her. The vase shattered, and Elaine fell to the floor. The camera shook as Nancy whispered, "Oh my God!" Before the video ended, I replayed it twice. My chest felt tight, my vision blurring with fury. Elaine had never mentioned it. She must have been too ashamed, or too afraid to make me see what was really happening. Nancy touched my arm gently. "I'm sorry, Michael. I thought you should know." I nodded, unable to speak. That afternoon, Pastor Henry stopped by. He looked uneasy, his hands clasped around his Bible. He said he had overheard more of Vanessa's talk at the church, stories about Elaine being controlling, about me being too old to manage the house. He said some people had started believing her. It was the kind of manipulation that spread fast in small towns. When he left, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the old tape recorder. The sound of her voice laughing in that video looped in my head. By the time Elaine came downstairs, I had already called Robert. He answered on the first ring. I told him about the video, the lies, everything. He said to keep the footage safe and that he would start preparing the documents. His tone was calm but firm. Michael, it's time to make this official. While Robert began drafting the case, the house continued to crack. Daniel was getting notices from the bank, statements for credit accounts he didn't recognize. He came to me one night, holding a stack of papers. "Dad, did you open a new line of credit?" I looked at the documents. The account was under his name, but the purchases were for household goods, electronics, and expensive baby furniture. I shook my head slowly. "Vanessa," I said. His face went pale. He confronted her later that evening. I stayed in my office, listening through the thin wall. I heard her voice rise, defensive and sharp. "You don't understand how finances work," she snapped. "I had to handle things because your father doesn't." Daniel tried to reason with her, but her tone never softened. The argument ended with a door slamming. Later, when the house was quiet again, I walked to my study. The light from the hallway spilled across the floor. I could hear Vanessa in the kitchen on a video call. Her voice was low but clear. "Rachel," she said, "you wouldn't believe how easy it's been. This house will be mine soon." I froze. My heart pounded in my ears. She laughed, a soft, confident sound. I pulled my phone from my pocket and hit record, capturing every word. After she went upstairs, I saved the file to my computer and backed it up twice. When Daniel came down, his face was drawn, tired. We sat in silence for a long time before he finally spoke. "Dad, I let her control everything." I nodded slowly. "She's good at that," I said. "She makes you believe you're the problem." He stared at the table, his voice breaking. I thought I was helping her, that she just needed stability. I didn't see what she was doing to Mom. I wanted to tell him I understood, but the truth was, I didn't. I couldn't understand how the boy I'd raised had let someone tear apart everything we built. Still, I reached across the table and put my hand on his shoulder. "What matters is that you see it now," I said. That night, I sat beside Elaine as she folded laundry in the living room. The TV was on but muted. She looked fragile, her eyes tired but determined. I told her about the video Nancy had shown me. She didn't look surprised. "I fell because she pushed me," she said quietly. "But what could I do, Michael? You know how Daniel gets when we fight." I nodded. "I know." We sat in silence until she reached into a small stack of mail beside her and pulled out a printed notice. "Look at this," she said. It was a property tax statement, but the email address listed for correspondence wasn't ours, it was Vanessa's. I stared at it, reading every line twice. The notice had been rerouted to her account, and the payments were marked as pending under her name. My hands started to shake. This wasn't about family anymore. It wasn't about pride or misunderstanding. It was theft, slow and deliberate. Elaine looked at me. Fear and exhaustion etched across her face. "What do we do now?" I took a deep breath, folded the paper, and slipped it into the folder in my desk. I called Robert again. His voice was steady as always. "Keep everything," he said. "Every document, every message, every recording. We're not dealing with emotion now, Michael. We're dealing with evidence." When I hung up, Elaine was standing in the doorway, watching me. For the first time in months, she looked relieved. "At least now," she said softly, "we know what we're fighting." Later that night, I checked the locks on every door, something I hadn't done in years. Upstairs, the house was silent, except for the soft rhythm of the baby's breathing through the monitor. I went into my study, turned on the lamp, and opened the drawer where I kept the recordings, the documents, the video. The folder was thicker now, heavy with proof. I sat there for a long time, the yellow light washing over the papers, and realized how strange it was to feel both fear and calm at once. Fear, because I knew this would tear the family apart. Calm, because for the first time, I had something real to fight with. When the clock struck midnight, I closed the drawer, turned off the lamp, and looked out the window. The street was empty, the town asleep. Somewhere out there, Vanessa was still plotting, still convinced she could take what wasn't hers, but not anymore. I went upstairs, checked on Elaine, and kissed her forehead. She murmured in her sleep, a sound somewhere between peace and worry. I whispered, "Rest, sweetheart. Tomorrow we start taking our house back." Chapter 7. The confrontation and the verdict. Robert called early the next morning. His tone was measured, precise, the way it always was when things were about to turn serious. "The notice is ready, Michael. She'll receive it today. It's official now." I thanked him and sat in silence for a while after we hung up. Elaine was at the kitchen table, stirring her coffee without drinking it. She didn't ask what Robert had said, but she knew. When I finally told her that the papers were being delivered, she nodded and whispered, "It's time." The letter arrived in the afternoon. Vanessa was in the living room, rocking Emily in her arms, humming softly. Daniel was out at the hardware store. The knock on the door startled her. She opened it, signed for the delivery, and stood there reading the papers. I watched her eyes move across the page, her expression tightening. When she looked up, her voice was sharp. "What is this?" "It's a formal notice," I said evenly. "You've been asked to vacate the property in 30 days and restore all ownership rights to their rightful holders." She laughed, an incredulous sound. "You can't be serious, Michael. I've managed this house for years. Do you have any idea what I've done for this family?" Elaine came to the doorway, her face pale but steady. Vanessa turned on her, voice rising. "You've always hated me. You never wanted me here. This was your plan all along, wasn't it?" Elaine didn't reply. She just looked at her, quiet and calm, which seemed to enrage Vanessa even more. Daniel came home 15 minutes later, holding a bag of groceries. He stopped when he saw the tension in the room. "What's going on?" he asked. Vanessa thrust the letter toward him. "Your father's trying to throw us out." Daniel read it, his brow furrowing. "Dad, what is this?" I told him what Robert had discovered, what the evidence showed, what she had done. His face shifted between disbelief and guilt. Vanessa crossed her arms. "They're lying to you, Daniel. They're twisting everything. You know I've been the one keeping this house running." She gestured around the room. "Look at everything. The bills, the repairs, the baby. Without me, they'd drown in chaos." Robert arrived just then, followed by Pastor Henry and Nancy Keller. I had asked them both to come, witnesses to whatever would unfold. Vanessa's smile faltered when she saw them. Robert set his briefcase on the table, calm as always. "Mrs. Hartwell, you have the right to respond to this notice, but I suggest you review the evidence before making any statements." She scoffed. "Evidence? What evidence?" I opened my hand and showed her the small USB drive I had been carrying for weeks. Every word, every email, every recording. Robert plugged it into his laptop, and the room filled with the sound of her own voice. The conversation with Rachel, the laughter, the phrase that had burned itself into my memory. "This house will be mine soon." Vanessa froze. Daniel looked at her, his face tightening with realization. She opened her mouth, searching for words, but nothing came out. Robert opened another file. This time, it was the bank forms, her forged signatures, the correspondence that traced everything back to her email. Pastor Henry looked down at the floor, and Nancy crossed her arms, shaking her head. Vanessa finally found her voice. "That's not real. You edited that. You're framing me. Robert remained calm. These documents have been authenticated. The timestamps and IP addresses match your personal account. He clicked once more, and the bank logo filled the screen, followed by her digital signature. Daniel stepped back, his hand covering his mouth. He looked at his wife like he was seeing her for the first time. You did this, he said quietly. She turned toward him, desperate. Daniel, listen to me. I was trying to protect us. Your parents were never going to give you anything. I did this for our future. He shook his head. No, you did it for yourself. Her composure broke then. She began pacing, her voice rising higher. You don't understand, any of you. I built this home. I sacrificed everything while you just sat there and watched. I kept this house running for years. I stood, letting her words hang in the air. When she stopped, breathing hard, I said, You can take many things, Vanessa. But not the truth. She stared at me, trembling. Then she looked at Daniel again, as if expecting him to step in. He didn't. He just turned away. The room fell silent except for the quiet ticking of the clock on the wall. Robert began packing his laptop. I'll file the motion in the morning, he said. Pastor Henry nodded toward Elaine and me before guiding Nancy toward the door. Vanessa's shoulders slumped. She walked past me, her voice barely audible. You'll regret this. None of you know what you're doing. I didn't answer. I watched her walk down the hall to the bedroom she had taken over, the same room that used to belong to Daniel as a boy. The door closed softly behind her. Daniel stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the floor. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. She was my wife, Dad. I know, I said quietly. The next morning she began packing. There was no shouting, no tears. She moved quickly, almost mechanically, filling suitcases with clothes, baby toys, and electronics. Daniel helped her carry the boxes to the car. Elaine stood by the window, holding Emily, her expression unreadable. When Vanessa finished loading the last bag, she turned toward us. I hope you're proud, she said. Then she got into the car and drove away. The silence that followed was heavy, strange, almost sacred. Daniel stood in the driveway long after the car disappeared down the street. I walked out to him. He didn't turn around. It's really over, he said. I nodded. He wiped his eyes and looked at the house. She almost took everything, he whispered. I put a hand on his shoulder. Almost, I said. That night, the house felt different. Lighter, quieter, but also fragile, as if it were holding its breath. Elaine sat in her favorite chair, Emily asleep in her arms. Daniel sat across from me, staring into nothing. None of us spoke. There was nothing left to say. I went to my study before bed. The folder was still there, thick with evidence, the USB beside it. I locked them away, not out of fear but out of finality. For the first time in months, I wasn't preparing for another battle. I was waiting for peace to return, however slowly it might come. Upstairs, Elaine was already asleep, the baby's soft breathing filling the room. I stood by the window, looking out at the dark driveway where her car had been. There was no satisfaction in winning, only the quiet relief of surviving. And as the night settled around the house, I realized that some wars end not with victory, but with silence. Chapter 8, Karma and Justice. 3 months passed before the court date arrived. Winter had faded from Aspen Ridge, but the cold seemed to linger in the spaces between us. When Elaine and I walked into the courthouse that morning, the air smelled faintly of polished wood and coffee. Robert met us in the hallway, calm as ever, papers in hand. Daniel walked beside us, his shoulders squared but his face pale. I could tell the weight of what was coming still sat heavy on him. The courtroom was quiet except for the rustle of documents and the low hum of whispered voices. Vanessa sat at the defendant's table, her hair pulled back, her face drawn but defiant. She looked at no one. Her lawyer leaned in, murmuring something, but she didn't respond. Across from her, Elaine sat upright, her hands clasped together in her lap, her composure unshaken. Judge Carol Thompson entered, her robe sweeping across the floor as everyone stood. She glanced over the files before her, then looked up, her expression firm but not unkind. After reviewing the evidence and testimony, she said, "This court finds that the property in question legally belongs to Michael and Elaine Grant." She paused, letting the words settle. The defendant, Vanessa Hartwell, is sentenced to 2 years of probation and is required to repay all legal fees incurred by the plaintiffs. Vanessa's shoulders slumped. Her attorney tried to speak, but she lifted a hand, signaling for him to stop. She stared straight ahead, her jaw tight. For a brief moment, I thought she might cry, but she didn't. She just sat there, silent, the same way she had left our house months ago. After the hearing, Robert shook my hand. "You did everything right, Michael. You were patient when most people would have lost control." I told him I wasn't sure patience had been a virtue this time. He smiled faintly. "It was justice," he said. "That's rarer than patience." Outside, the air felt lighter. Elaine stood beside me, her arm looped through mine. Daniel came up behind us, his eyes red but clear. "I'm sorry," he said simply. I nodded, knowing that was enough. He had seen the truth for himself. Sometimes that was the only apology that mattered. A few days later, a local journalist named Ethan Rhodes called. He had heard about the case and asked if he could write a story. I hesitated, but Elaine thought it might help others. When the article came out, it was titled, "When Greed Walked Through the Parents' Door." It spread faster than I expected. People stopped me at the grocery store to say they'd read it, some offering sympathy, others sharing their own stories. Vanessa's reputation collapsed almost overnight. She sold her remaining belongings and left Aspen Ridge without saying goodbye to anyone. Life slowly began to settle back into its old rhythm. Daniel found a new job at a local tech company. He started bringing Emily over more often, sometimes staying for dinner, sometimes just long enough to sit on the porch with me and talk about things other than the past. Elaine smiled more now, the lines on her face softening again. By the spring of 2025, the house finally felt like ours again. The scent of fresh paint lingered in the hallway where Vanessa had hung her pictures. The garden, which had been neglected for so long, bloomed with yellow tulips. Elaine spent her mornings there, tending to the flowers with Emily by her side, the little girl splashing water on her shoes while Elaine laughed. I sat on the porch one afternoon, with the old tape recorder beside me. I pressed record for what I knew would be the last time. My voice came out steady. "Justice isn't revenge," I said softly. "It's reclaiming the peace someone tried to steal." I looked up and watched Elaine lift Emily into her arms. The sun caught the edge of her hair, and for a moment everything felt right again. Daniel joined me a few minutes later, handing me a cup of coffee. He watched his daughter chasing butterflies across the yard and smiled. "She's going to be okay, Dad. We all are," I said. He nodded. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. I wanted to tell him the same, but my throat was too tight to speak. When evening came, the sky turned gold, and the air smelled like cut grass and rain. I picked up the recorder again, not to document anything, but to close it properly. I spoke the words that had stayed in my mind since that day in court. "If anyone ever takes away your dignity in your own home, remember, you don't need to shout to get it back. You just need to stand tall and say, 'Enough.'" I stopped the tape and listened to the silence that followed. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful, the kind of silence that comes after a storm when you realize the roof held and the house is still standing. Elaine called from the garden, her voice warm and light. "Dinner's ready." I stood, turned off the recorder, and placed it on the table beside me. The porch light flickered on as I walked inside. The house welcomed me the way it used to, full of the smells of food and laughter, full of the life that had nearly been stolen but was now ours again. And as I closed the door behind me, I thought about how fragile peace can be and how strong it becomes once you've fought for it. If you've stayed with this story until the end, let it remind you of something simple. Every house has its storms, and every heart has its breaking point. But if you hold on to truth, patience, and courage, even the quietest voices can bring the walls back to life. If this story meant something to you, share it, stay close, and remember that sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's the sound of peace finally returning home.